Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a nice 4-game college basketball slate. This slate actually has a pretty good amount of value, I think, in it, so that definitely makes it viable today. There's also not a ton of like super overpriced guys, so like our most expensive player on the slate is 8,700 bucks. So we don't have a ton of like super high-end guys, and then we do have some nice value plays, so you're gonna be able to mix in some of these more expensive dudes to fit your lineups. With that said, there's definitely more good guards and forwards today, but we also have some guys that we like that are capable of playing both positions. So overall, either way, you've got some viable options on the slate. As for these games, we have 2 games that are going to be pretty tight, and then we have 2 games that look like they're at least 10-point matchups or more. All the games fall in a similar range in terms of scoring, with one game just being slightly above the other 3. But overall, they're all pretty much in the same realm from that perspective. I do have Iona over Siena. I have St. Louis over Davidson, Kent State over Buffalo, and then New Mexico over Air Force. The Kent State and New Mexico are the 2 games that are most likely to be a little bit more differential, so they're about 10-point spreads as opposed to the other 2 games that are in the 4 or 5-point spreads. So with that said, though, let's get into the slate itself. We're going to start with our guards here. We're going to start with Dennis Jenkins for Iona. Now, he has started all season long. He's only had 1 game under 19 fantasy points all year. He's been over 25 points, fantasy points in 9 straight. So I think he's a very viable option. He's also averaging .94 fantasy points per game. So he's a great play on the slate. He's one of my favorite, like, more expensive plays, plus 7,500 or more. He's one of my favorite guys available. And Iona should be in a pretty good game here. They're the second highest scoring team, I think, on the slate. And so I look for them to have a good game here. Then we're going to look at Desmond Watson. Now, he can play guard or forward, so do keep that in mind here. He has some good upside, though, at this price point, simply because he's only $4,000. He's he's started 6 straight games, and 4 of those he's been over 22 fantasy points. He's worth the risk here, even though he does have a low floor. He's been having some really good games lately. He's only had 5 games under 10 fantasy points all season long before he was starting, in fact. So overall, he's in a really good spot here. He's been playing well lately, and as long as he gets some jump shot opportunities, which if he gets over, he's either been shooting less than a few shots or he's been shooting a bunch. And so if he can shoot over, 7 or 8 shots, he should be good to go and be a nice, easy lock for this particular slate. And again, you can throw him in guard or forward. Then we're going to look at Michael Ealy for Siena. Now, he is a pretty inexpensive player here. He's not as safe as Watson, who I just mentioned, but he has some decent upside here at the price. I feel like he had a few games under 10 fantasy points on the season, but overall he has 20 fantasy point upside in this matchup, and while he's playing inconsistently, I do think he's in a good spot and should be a good option on this slate, especially in a game that should be relatively tight. Then we're going to look at Walter Clayton Jr. for Iona. He's another guy I really like today. He should be starting after missing a few games. He's started the last game and played 40 minutes. I expect to see a similar situation today. He should be getting in the mid-30-minute range and have some nice upside here. And as a starter, he's only had 1 game under 19 fantasy points all season long. Then we're going to look at Barrick Jean Lewis for $6,000 for Iona. Now, he has decent upside here at a good price. He starts and he plays around 30 minutes a game. He has missed 3 games at the end of last year, but since being back, he's been over 20 fantasy points and 4 of the last 5. He's not a must-play, but he is viable on the slate. And then we're going to look at Jalen House. Now, he's probably my favorite, over $8,000 play. Well, he and one other guy are tied to forward, but he's averaging 1.08 fantasy points per minute, which is really good for a guard. For New Mexico, he's had several games over 40 fantasy points on the year, including 4 in the last 8. He's only had 2 under 30 fantasy points in that stretch. He has a mid-20s floor, but he has a nice ceiling here, and so I think he's viable on the slate. Obviously, with some of the value plays, you're definitely going to be able to pay up and get some safe $8,500 style plays, and he's definitely one of them. So then we're going to look at forwards here, and we're going to start with Nelly Jr. Joseph. He's overall my top expensive play on the slate. He's been really solid lately. In 9 of the last 10 games, he's over 34 fantasy points. He's been pretty expensive, but he is worth it. He's had double doubles in 7 of the last 7 straight games. He didn't have a bunch before that point, but he's been extremely good since. And I look for him to be a great option on this slate. He's probably my favorite play on the expensive side. Just slightly better than Jalen House, who I just mentioned in the guard situation. He's also averaging a 1.17 fantasy points per minute. So he's a great option on the slate and somebody I'm definitely going to utilize here. Then we're going to look at Samuel Meninga. He's at $7,900. He has a few games under 22 fantasy points on the season, but he has some nice upside in a game that should be relatively close. And he has some double-double potential as well, though he's pretty inconsistent with that. But he's had some big upside, and his price is pretty fair. He's averaging 0.96 fantasy points per minute. Then we're going to look at Jake Forrester for St. Louis. At $3,400, he comes off the bench and gets minutes that are streaky, but he has some decent upside here, and at this price point, he's not too terrible. Obviously, he's been inconsistent with the minutes, but if he can get, in the mid-20s in a game where his team should be pretty tight, I expect him to play a little bit more. As you can see in some of those games that have been tight, he has played some decent minutes, and so especially considering they're favored to win, I think he's a good option here. But he has a teammate, Terrence Hargrave, who I also like a lot, who actually does start, and he's played in the last 6 games and has no games under 14 fantasy points. He started, the last 6 and has no games under 14. And at this price point, he is just uber safe for his potential. He has nice upside as well. Obviously, he does have some risk because maybe his minutes are streaky. But overall, as long as he continues to start, he should be good to go here. They've also, I think, won all 5 games that he started. So I think he's in 5 of the last 6 games he started, and including the last 5. So he's in a really good spot here. So he's one of my good plays as well. Overall, Kent State is actually the highest scoring team on the slate. However, they do seem to run a little bit of a lengthier bench, and aside from 1 or 2 guys, they don't really play a ton of guys limited minutes or maximum minutes outside of Curry and Jacobs. But those guys are a little bit overpriced and a little bit more streaky than some of the other options. They are guys to consider as utility options if you have a lot of value left over, but overall, I'm going to stay away from them, especially considering it's the game that's got the most likelihood of being a blowout. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.